Hey everyone, Susan Beatty here again with another video. I hope you're having a good week this week. I know it's Friday afternoon about 4:30, so hopefully you're not at work. Hopefully you're at home enjoying your weekend already. But I thought I would share another video about some things that I've talked to some teachers about recently that they're still struggling with. If you're struggling with it, then hopefully this will help you if you read it or if you watch it. It's not very long, so I just wanted to take a few moments to share something with you that I found in some of the research that I've been doing about this topic. As we all know, we're all doing the claim evidence reasoning strategy to help get our students to explain what we want them to know or what we want them to tell us. And a lot of us struggle with, or a lot of our students do really well with making a claim. They do a good job at finding evidence, but they struggle when it comes to reasoning. And so I want to troubleshoot that a little bit with you and give you just a couple of ideas of how you might get your students to do a better job with that. If anybody else has any better suggestions, please share those. I would love to know what those are. If you found some success with certain strategies, I'd love to hear what those are. But a lot of times students, we've already said, are confused by how to reason. They don't really know what that means. So therefore they struggle with being able to do it. So let's just review for a second that the CER is a strategy. It was developed by a couple of researchers several years ago about how to get students to explain. And so when they're asked a question, we want them to be able to explain it clearly and logically. And this strategy helps them to do that. But what happens is students get confused by it and they struggle with it, and then teachers struggle to get them to do it, and they get frustrated as well. I've talked to several of you about the frustrations you're having with that, and there's different reasons why we're having that. But here is just a suggestion, or a couple of suggestions about how to help them be more successful in providing the reasoning that we want them to provide in our explanations. So here goes. Let's review for a second what reasoning is. Remember, reasoning is the logical connection between the claim and the evidence based on scientific definitions, rules, or principles. So, in other words, it's the science that supports the evidence. You know, we ask students a question, and I'm going to talk about our questions here in just a moment, too. But we ask them a question. We've taught them really well that a claim is the answer to the question. And we've taught them really well that evidence is the data that we have either collected ourselves or we found somewhere else that help to support our claim. But then sometimes we have trouble getting them to tell us the science behind it. And I think that's probably because they're not making the connection between the science we've taught them and the questions we're asking them. The labs we're doing, the activities we're doing, the connections are not being made there. So the first thing to do, I think, is make sure they understand what reasoning is. We've probably said it to them, but it may not be getting through. So if you can find a way to review it with them, maybe review it with them every day, post it in your room, relate it to something in their everyday life so that it gets in their head and they continue to think about, what does it mean to reason? What does it mean to provide reasoning in my answer? So first, get them to make sure they understand what reasoning is. It's the science behind the claim or the evidence. And then here's another thing that we need to think about is make sure they understand the whole question. Now, we think we kind of take it for granted sometimes that they understand what the question means. Sometimes they might not. So make sure that the question is clear to them and be intentional about focusing on the question. I know when I was teaching, I was really guilty of giving them the question and say, here, make a claim, provide me evidence, and give me some reasoning. But I didn't really focus on the question that I was asking them. I didn't really think about whether they understood the question, whether they understood all of the terms in it. So some of the people that I've read about that have worked with this, they say we should frame the question. And what that means is to make sure that they can define every term in the question. Because what that does is it gives them some clues as to what their reasoning needs to be. Why is that important? Well, a lot of times they think they have to pull reasoning from the air when they know what it is if they would just look at the question. So here's a good example, or a simple example. Much of your content is more complex than this, and it would require a lot more thinking. But here's just a simple example to show you what I mean. If we give them the question, is error matter? Before you ask them to make a claim or generate or provide evidence, whether it's from an experiment you ask them to do, or maybe you just ask them to find it somewhere. Before you ask them to do that, make sure they know what error is and make sure they know what matter is. You probably have studied that with them. You've probably talked about it, but can they tell you the definition for error? Can they tell you the definition for matter? Point that out, make sure they know that. And then if they can define those terms, then they can use those definitions and anything else related to that, a law or another vocabulary word that's closely related, in their reasoning section of their answer. So if they know what matter is in this particular example, they can relate it to the evidence that maybe they did in a balloon experiment. Maybe they had to use balloons to show you that whether air is matter or not. And they collected the evidence to show that air in the balloon showed mass on the scale and it took up space. And that's the definition of matter. Something that takes up space and has mass. And then they can, whenever they're writing their answer, they make their claim, air is matter, and then they provide the evidence from their lab, from their data, and then they can reason it out by saying, I know that air is matter because it has mass and it takes up space. So, if you're asking students to make a claim, make sure that the question is what you want it to be. Make sure it's something you really want to know, that they know what it means. You might ask yourself this question: will answering this question help you know if students understand aspects of the phenomenon you're asking them to explain? One question is not going to get them to explain the whole phenomenon, it's too big. But if it's a question that will get them to explain just a part of that phenomenon, it's probably a good question. And then make sure they know what the words mean in it. I know this has been a simple example, but I just implore you to think about your questions. The next time you ask them to do a CER in your class, remember, make sure they know what reasoning is, the science behind the evidence. Give them some clues about what reasoning to use by referring them back to the terms in the question, and then repeat this over and over so that it becomes natural for them to, when they have to do reasoning, they look back at the question and look at the terms of the question and use those to help them with their reasoning. That's just a couple of the suggestions. I hope this helps. I hope everybody has a great weekend and a great week next week. I'm looking forward to visiting with some of you in the upcoming weeks, and I've enjoyed all of the visits that I've done so far. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks. Bye.